Sportsfeld!
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. We are taking you back to, I think, a bit of a forgotten era in Toronto sports. I think we do spend so much time remembering the 90s, and we remember, the turn of the century, those teams. And we do, the nice little run that Toronto sports had between 2014 and 2019. And we forget that gray area where it was the Black Jays and it was these sort of mediocre, middling Toronto Raptors teams. And we thought, we've done the DeMar Kyle arc. We've heard that story. We've heard the Vince arc basically end in a missed three-pointer against Philly. What have we missed? We missed the juicy middle, the Andrea Bargnani years, the Jorge Garbajosa years, the Juan Dixon years, if you will. We are looking back to the 2006-2007 Toronto Raptors. And what else would it be for this team at this time than to have their season ended at the hands of Vincent Lamar Carter? Three names like a serial killer. Jake, what do you remember first and foremost about the 2007 Toronto Raptors?
I remember three things. I remember them being extremely good at home. I remember the surprise and the sudden joy of having playoff basketball to watch again. And I remember TJ Ford just not throwing, or maybe it was Jose Calderon. One of them didn't throw a bounce pass to end the game and to end the season, and I'm mad about it, but we'll get to that.
First overall pick in the draft goes to the Toronto Raptors, and this
was that same year. No way. You're right. Holy shit.
With the first pick in the 2006 NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors select Andrea Bargnani from Italy.
What's big news in Italy? Not as big as Italy playing the Ukraine in the World Cup, but you're looking at the first European player ever selected number one overall. The second international player, Yao Ming, was the first back in 2002. And Andre Bargnani, not a center, plays on the perimeter, great shooter. The photo opportunity with the commissioner. Let's go to the Toronto draft room. That's the reaction. Moments ago, as they zeroed in on the 7-footer, he's only 20 years of age, as Fran Fraschilla said, and he will develop. As Fran said, don't be quick to point out that he's not an athletic player.
Il Mago from Rome, Italy. It's Andrea Bargnani. He is 4 days older than me. That is something to learn. He comes out 11.6 points per game, 37.3 from three on 4 attempts per game. Andrea Bargnani. You have Chris Bosh, 22. You sort of have your two big stars, your stretch four, if you will. The idea was stretch four, stretch five, and then it ended up neither one of them wanted to play center. I think in modern NBA, maybe this team is a little bit ahead of its time. But you have 29-year-old Morris Peterson. You have Jose Calderon, TJ Ford, the Calder-Ford point guard combo in full effect. I believe actually called a Ford in its first year when it really would begin to form like Voltron. You have guys like Juan Dixon, Fred Jones, Morris Peterson, of course, your big, not blocking shots, but altering shots was Rasho Nesterovic. Joey Graham, who I don't think ever figures out what it was going to be for him. Chris Humphries, also on this roster, played 60 games. You look back and your first reaction like this was, oh, what a bad team. But I could almost sort of see the blueprint of where they thought basketball was going, right? Because you have Calderon, who is doesn't turn the ball over point guard, who can shoot threes if he's left wide open and doesn't have to dribble into them, and TJ Ford, who can run with speed. And then you have, again, like I said, stretch four, stretch five guys. If you could play high pick and roll and switch and all these things. And then your wings, Anthony Parker, who became a crowd favorite very quickly. And, your muscle, your Joey Graham, you're in the OG Anunoby mold of defender. He would say 3-and-D, but he did not hit a three. Really all year long. He was half an attempt per game, 29%. So AD guy, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I'm going to start our look back here. I'm just looking at the 2006 NBA draft because obviously you can't talk about Bargnani without talking about the fact he went first overall.
Yes. And generally first overall picks,
yes,
help franchises.
I am here to not defend the pick.
Not a great draft year.
That is kind of where I'm going. If you look at it by VORP, in the draft, Bargnani is 17th, sandwiched between Ronaldo Balkman and Craig Smith.
I mean, that's not good.
If we go by win shares, he's bumped up a little bit to 12th between Randy Foye and Daniel Gibson. Obviously, LaMarcus Aldridge should have been the first overall pick here, but really, there's only 6, if you want to stretch it to 9 names that made a huge impact on the league. Marcus Aldridge, of course, Kyle Lowry.
I was going to say
24th in the draft.
The beautiful irony of it all is that the Raptors
ended up with the best player.
The year that they picked first overall, the Raptors franchise player is in the draft. That is pretty crazy.
Very true. Paul Millsap, JJ Redick, Rajon Rondo, Rudy Gay, Thabo Sefolosha, Brandon Roy, PJ Tucker. If you really want to stretch to 10, I guess you could say Ronnie Brewer. But after that, it's pretty dire.
And listen, it was Aldridge was the guy who went number 2, and the guy that inevitably would be sort of your comparison there. You got a little bit of Brandon Roy, because he obviously balled out, but he only played 6 seasons in the league.
Yeah.
So.
And like Aldridge, no question, should have been the pick. He's first in win shares, second in VORP in the draft. Both number 2 and number 1 in those 2 stats is Kyle Lowry. So,
but then you're coming back the next year with Aldridge and Bosch is your front
right.
court.
And at the time, that was like you were saying, that was the kind of thing that could work now. But at the time, it was like, well, you got 2 power forwards. What are you going to do?
Even now, that is a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old you're having coming in. It's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not as easy as just plugging them in as they wanted it to be at this time. Ultimately, Bosch would end up being the one playing the 5, which we would see later in his career, something he would really grow to excel in, being a small ball 5 and then a stretch 4 as well. Like at the 4, he was really a dominant player. Some great all-time like heart and soul, if you were there, these guys make your all-time favorite Raptors list as well. Jorge Garbajosa was hugely popular with hairy white guys in the Toronto area.
The Coachella jersey watch is huge on Garbajosa Raptors jerseys, I think.
PJ Tucker also was drafted in this team.
I just forget that we drafted him. That's fun.
So a couple 2021 NBA free agents that are going to Miami.
Not Toronto.
Yeah. But, teaming up all these years later, these 2 guys still in the league.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Raptors, as you mentioned, a very good home team, not overall a very good team, full stop. I do remember this is the year the bottom fell out of the Atlantic Division. It was the NBA's Titanic division. Raptors went 47-35, a mere 12 games over 500, and finished first in the Atlantic Division, above the 41-41 New Jersey Nets, Philly 35-47, the Knicks 33-49, and the Celtics 24-58. We don't know how good we had it with the Raptors being that bad. Other sort of big important things to note, this is the first year that Bryan Colangelo was the sort of like fully behind the wheel organizing this team, and that is sort of where you get those additions like Anthony Parker and that switch to some of those European players and drafting Bargnani. We had seen the year before, Rafa Arujo was on the team the year before, Charlie Villanueva, 3 different guys with the last name Williams, Aaron, Alvin, and Eric. The Lauren Woods year, if you will, is what and Matt Bonner is on year 27-55, 2005, 2006 Toronto Raptors. So from 4th to 1st in the division.
Yeah, and they made some, I would say, off the board solid additions. You had Anthony Parker, as you said, who was EuroLeague MVP. Garbajosa played for Spain internationally. Fred Jones had won a dunk contest. Remember Derek Martin was basically the coach by the end of his tenure with the Raptors. It was an interesting roster. I'm not going to sit here and say it was necessarily a 3 seed in the East roster, but even though they literally were. But it was a very interesting, it's very easy and fair and fun to make fun of Bryan Colangelo's tenure with the Toronto Raptors. But there were some ideas there.
What the hell happened to the rest of the fucking East? That team is a 3 seed though.
Right?
Truthfully.
At 47 wins. The East then was just bad. The East in the NBA in this time was not a good conference.
But you would even think the Nets, who would come in and would be where the story ends up going, you would think they're just a 500 team, truly unbelievable. The Raptors, it was as if that baseball adage that had been recently coming around is even trying to try ended up being a huge inefficiency. It was putting together even a half decent team was unbelievable. And I think Raptors get a bit of a reputation in their franchise around this. This is sort of where it begins, where not that they become a competent franchise right away. There's still plenty of wander in the darkness that comes after this and the fallout of, losing and transitioning to Masai. But I think they get a little stung with like when they became good under Masai. I think memories of this team sort of lingered where it was like they're just a competent team surrounded by awful teams, right? It was just sort of like what they had done, and that was
they can win the Atlantic. Who cares?
Yes, and then until the conference finals against the Cavs in 2016, that there's 2 years where they don't really shake that reputation.
Looking at the East this year, not trying to skip over the whole season, but just like the Raptors were technically the fourth best record in the conference, but we're third by virtue of winning the Atlantic Division. But like the Pistons were the first in the Eastern Conference with 53 wins. Orlando made the playoffs as the 8th seed with being under 500. The Nets were literally 500. So were the 7 seed Wizards. This was not a strong year for the Eastern Conference. There was a good year for LeBron James, proving that everything went through him, and then the Spurs saying, too bad.
Yes. Some of your just sort of ideas. The Raptors were a 107 offensive rating, which was 10th, and a 106 defensive rating, which was 12th. So it gives you an idea. They were a top 10 team. They were that plus 1.1 net rating. They were a top 10 team. They played 9th fastest pace, and basically by all those advanced metrics are basically a top 10 team, right there at 10. But it wasn't so much that they were fluking. Or just like, man, there was a lot of really bad teams, and they had what would be, again, as I sort of mentioned previously about the reputation they get, there's a lot of competent players is sort of what they succeeded with. Whereas the top end, Bosch was very good as a 22-year-old and is deliberately an all-star, 22 and 10 and a block and 2 assists. And Anthony Parker played very well, as you said. But it's, there's 9, 10, 11. Once you get down to Joey Graham, you've named 11 guys that sort of see significant time and play significant minutes for this team. So it ends up being sort of addition by subtraction of just terrible players at the back end here.
It's such an odd aberration almost of this team. And there's a lot of, like the Raptors pre-2019, there's so many what ifs, and we've talked about a lot of them. But, the what if Garbajosa doesn't get injured is a big one. And what if they push that series to 7? I remember the next year they lose to Orlando in the first round, and it was when this season ended, it felt like the beginning of something, and then we were very quickly reminded that it was not.
Well, and this team, they started 2-8. They did not come out of the gate looking like a team that was in any way, shape, or form going to be the best team in the league. They split their first 4 games, and then they lose 6 straight. November 20th, they're 2-8. They would crawl back basically all the way back. It takes them until mid-season, that 22-22. Game 44, they beat the Celtics to get back to 500. And again, we talked about the East. Another small winning streak in January, and that sort of seals up the division for them. They win it, not so much running away, but a fairly comfortable lead thanks to those 2 runs. They beat the Lakers to cap off the 5-game winning streak.
Yeah, I remember that February as being sort of, it came so out of nowhere that all of a sudden they went 9-3 in the month and took the lead in the division, never looked back. It was kind of like, oh, what's happening here? And then Bosch had an unreal February. Just like 41 against the Magic, got MVP chance, beat Carter and the Nets. The team broke their franchise records for most home wins and highest home winning percentage going into the All-Star break. February was a franchise-shaping month in a lot of ways. It was the first time the franchise had seen anything resembling quality since Vince was traded. And to see it and live it was kind of like, it pulled out of a fog of like kind of vaguely paying attention to the Raptors. Yeah, and they carried it in. They also had a super strong March where they win 6 straight in the month of March as well. It ends up being just 8-6, but a really high. The offense really clicking 101 points per game in that month, just really like picking it up and again that 6-game winning streak, sort of erasing any last doubt. Beating the Magic and the Sixers on the road, beating the Bulls at home, the T-Wolves, beating the Pistons near the end of the year to sort of
get a statement win going into the playoffs. Vibes were pretty good. And I mean, who are you facing off against in the first round? If you're writing the story, the Raptors redemption, you want Vincent Lamar Carter in the first round, and they would get it.
And he's never going to be was never an all-time great, but March 26th, 2007 is where it all sort of crumbles in a way. Jorge Garbajosa turned into a monster for this one season, helped the Raptors become who they were, was sort of one of the key cogs in the identity of this Raptors team. He was very good. He won Rookie of the Month in December. And then on March 26th into Celtics, he suffered that horrific leg injury, taken out on a stretcher, broke his fibula, displaced his ankle and had ligament damage, and missed the rest of the season. He was only averaging 8.5 and 5, but his contributions to the team were huge. He was the heart of the whole thing. He was named to the all-rookie team with Bargnani, but without him, the whole thing just kind of didn't work as well. They go 8-6 in March. They actually won 2 games, the first 2 games after his injury, but it was right before the playoffs, not enough time to sort of really get set. And then without him to sort of mark a guy like Richard Jefferson, nothing really doing against New Jersey in the playoffs.
We'll get into the specifics of the series against New Jersey. And of course, some classic Vince, knife in the back from Vince Carter, next week on Sportsfeld Storytime.